Alright guys, today we're going to be playing a game. Which one is the iPod Touch 3rd generation? That's where you're wrong. Alright guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be taking a look at an unofficial release of iOS 6 working on the iPod Touch 3rd generation. So the iPod Touch 3rd generation got from iOS 3 to iOS 5.1.1, no further than iOS 5.1.1. So how is iOS 6 running, you may ask? Well, have you guys heard of something called Legacy iOS Kit? Well, with Legacy iOS Kit, it's a software where you can run unauthorized builds of iOS. And you can jailbreak and do other cool things. Alright guys, back to the point. The iPod Touch 3rd generation got from iOS 3 to iOS 5.1.1, no further. So iOS 6 never ran on the iPod Touch 3rd generation nor the iPad 1st generation. The reason why, you may ask? Well, Apple's stupid customer reasons. Alright guys, without rambling, we're going to be seeing how well iOS 6 runs on the 3rd generation iPod Touch. If we go to settings, it takes a while for it to load because iOS 6 unofficial build, general, and about iOS 6.1.6 10B500. And here's extra proof. No front or back camera. Hence the reason why there's no camera app on my 3rd generation iPod Touch. Compared to my 4th generation iPod Touch, as you can see right here, it has a camera on the back. And it's even got a slider for the camera on the lock screen, so I don't understand why. And there's even a camera app on my home screen, so that's pretty cool. But getting back to the point, why would you want a camera app on the home screen even if there's no camera on the front or back? Why? Alright guys, enough of me rambling. Let's actually test out iOS 6 on the 3rd generation iPod Touch. First, app, the App Store. As you can see right here, the App Store does work perfectly fine. Does take a while to load because of the old servers. I think Apple might know that this is a 3rd generation iPod Touch. I'm not really sure because this is modified iPhone 3GS firmware. Well, the 4th generation iPod Touch has actual firmware and IPSW files for it. But to get iOS 6 running on these devices, being the iPad 1st generation as well, you have to have a modded IPSW. So just like the iOS 7 on the iPod Touch 4th generation, like a modded IPSW, it's basically the same thing on the 3rd gen and the 1st gen iPad. And they also got iOS 7 running on the iPad 1st generation. So the App Store does work perfectly fine. You can download apps. As you can see right here, I've got heaps of apps on my home screen just by downloading them off the App Store. I also downloaded them from Veterus and iPhone OS Obscure is another app store I use. However, it's web-based and Safari-based, as you can see right here. It does work for most apps I do download on this device if there's no app available in the App Store for that specific app I want. But as you can see, I've got heaps of apps and games on the home screen ready for me to test out. And the first app we're going to test out is Flappy Bird, because Flappy Bird is a very controversial game, hence why it was removed from the App Store, because people would end up throwing their devices, destroying their technology over that game. But I'm not a technology destroyer. I'm pretty good at Flappy Bird. I'm a non-rage, if you can. Duh! What was that for, bro? That was me battery going low, so we're going to try again. So I think on the 3rd generation iPod, Flappy Bird does seem to lag. I am seeing, maybe that's why. Alright guys, at least I got to level 2, so that's the point. Alright guys, 3rd app, the music app. As you can see right here, the music app does work perfectly fine. You can load your music on here, you can download your music from the iTunes. I'm going to go back into my library. I've got all those music albums all downloaded. iTunes does recognize it, and the Reminders app does work perfectly fine, as well as the Notes app. The Weather app does also work. We're going to test out the stocks. Does take a while to load. Connected to a custom server. Weather also works. As you can see right here, works perfectly fine. Also guys, another thing, it's untethered, so every time you guys reboot the device, it will boot back into iOS 6 instead of DFU mode, or even iOS 5 for that matter. So you basically have an always 24-hour install of iOS 6 on the 3rd generation iPod Touch, opposed to the 4th gen where you have to boot while plugged into the computer. But one downside, you have to wait 5 minutes for the iPod Touch 3rd generation to boot up into iOS 6. I don't know why, but it's probably part of the exploit. But what about web browsing? Does Safari work perfectly fine? Yes, it does. It loaded up to iPhone OS Obscure. Going to try apple.com. I've heard apple.com doesn't really work with iOS 6 anymore, which is kind of sad, but it was expected. But what about Yahoo? We're going to try Yahoo. The Yahoo News. It does work to a certain degree, but only some pictures do show up due to it being an old browser from 2013, 2012. Compared to the 2011 browser on iOS 5. It basically almost shows nothing. But this is just completely upgraded, guys. Works perfectly fine. So that's web browsing right there. YouTube does sometimes work on the browser, but not kind of anymore because, you know, Google likes to shut down their web pages, you know, make it inaccessible on older firmwares and old device models. There is the Passbook app finally on the 3rd generation iPod Touch as opposed to iOS 5. Passbook didn't exist back then. You get almost the iOS 7 version due to me running iOS 6.6. With iOS 6.0, the Passbook app is actually different. Alright guys, this is my iOS 6.0 iPhone 5 and I'm going to show you guys what I mean about the Passbook app being different. Look at this, guys. This is the glory of Passbook on iOS 6.0. And also I forgot to mention, guys, this is a 64 gig iPhone 5. It has the iOS 7 boot ROM exploit to downgrade to iOS 6, so not really that rare, but it's rare when it's running iOS 6 and it's also 64 gigabytes, so guess I got the gold lucky charm. Anyways, guys, that concludes my review on iOS 6.6 running on the iPod Touch 3rd generation. Honestly, guys, I think Apple should have support iOS 6 on the 3rd gen iPod Touch as well as the iPad 1st generation because it runs exceptionally well. Thank you guys for watching. Comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.